Ford stores.
City, the fight for your vote. Your front row seat to the battle for New York's next mayor. It's the old guard clinging to power, chasing a candidate they never saw coming. Every night, our experts break it down.
What New Yorkers want above all else is authenticity.
We're listening to the people who matter most, you, the voters. And when the candidates sit across from us, nothing's off the table. What's your plan to make New York City feel like a safer city?
S.E. Cupp, that's your perception. Of course, there's a lot of crime.
So what's happening right now? Let's dive in. Welcome to Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote. It is Tuesday, October 28th. We're just 7 days away from this all-important New York City mayoral election. That's a week. Later in today's show, we're going to talk about a key issue in the race that one assemblyman feels like the candidates just haven't talked about enough. But first, let's get to some news. As always, joining me now is Nia Prater, a staff writer for New York Magazine's Intelligencer, who covers politics. Nia, welcome back to the show.
Good to be with you, Essie.
As we mentioned yesterday, early voting has seen record turnout over the weekend, and early voting is still open with just a week until Election Day. We don't know who people are casting votes for, but we can read between the lines a little bit to see who's turning out. So, Nia, what do we know?
Sure. So, the initial data that we've seen from the Board of Elections seems to show like a significant uptick in votes from members of the Gen X and Boomer generations. So skewing a little bit older than I think people might expect. Also, we've seen turnout is really high in both Brooklyn and Manhattan. And those are two boroughs that during the primary, Mamdani did particularly well in. So I think there's enough for all sides of the campaign to sort of feel good about. I think anytime that you can get over 2,000 New Yorkers to come out to early vote during a general election, which are typically not very competitive. I think that can be seen as a success for many people.
Yeah, the older voters, it's interesting. It's not all that surprising that older voters are coming out for early voting. They vote reliably. It's why they're often targeted by candidates, because they are reliable voters as opposed to younger voters. But Zohran Mamdani has managed to capture a lot of younger voters, at least in the primary. And by what we're seeing on the ground, are we seeing those numbers of young voters also come out in the numbers that the older voters are?
Gothamist did a really good report on this. It seems like for the moment, Gen X and Boomer voters are sort of outpacing that sort of 18 to 34 range. Now, of course, it's just the first few days of early voting, and also tonight and tomorrow have the latest hours. I think it goes until 8 p.m. I would assume a lot more people will come out to vote in those hours, after work versus, the 5 p.m. Start time. But there's still a lot of days to go. And of course, with the uptick of older voters, it's hard to say who that benefits more. I think the inclination is to see it as positive for Cuomo, but, with the general election, of course, you're having Republicans come out and weigh in on this race in a way that they weren't able to during the primary. So it's hard to see right now what that could mean.
I think, believing that older voters inure to the benefit of Andrew Cuomo is probably good conventional wisdom. But looking at some of the boroughs that are also turning out, these are places where Mamdani did really well in the primaries, right?
Right. And I think if you're Cuomo, though, there's a lot of good things to take away from this high number, and especially, like we mentioned, the generational differences. I think you would want to see those numbers in the Bronx and Queens, which are sort of considered more Cuomo heavy strongholds. I think you'd want to see heavier numbers there for him.
Right.
And Staten Island as well. We've seen, I think people would think of that as skewing more maybe towards Sliwa territory, but Cuomo has definitely campaigned there heavily, and he's definitely looking to sort of peel away some of those more Republican voters from Sliwa. And I think if that were happening in substantial numbers, you would see a higher number so far. But of course, there's still till Saturday we have early voting.
There's still a week in this election. Let's talk about the new Suffolk University poll that was released yesterday. It has Cuomo closing the gap on Mamdani, going from 20 points behind in September to just 10 points behind this week. Now, he's moving in the right direction, but 10 points is still a big gap. Is there enough time for Cuomo to come within striking distance in your view?
I mean, I think if you're on the Cuomo team, you should feel encouraged by that. But like you said,
Yeah.
I mean, we're soon to be less than a week out from the election. We've had more than 200,000 votes cast. That's not really including mail-in ballots, I believe. So a lot of people have already weighed in on this race. I mean, of course, you'll always have people that walk into the voting booth on election day without knowing which side they're leaning. I mean, I think that's who everybody is sort of aiming towards voters like that. But I
Those undecideds. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But, Cuomo lost the primary by 13 points. So it's not really that big
Right.
big of a difference from even the primary. But I would say they
Yeah.
should feel
Fair point.
encouraged, but that would be a significant hurdle to overcome, I think, in these last few days.
So we remember from the last debate that Mamdani got into a little trouble when he was pressed to answer where he stood on some of the ballot proposals that New Yorkers are currently voting on. They are on the ballot. New Yorkers are voting on them today. He still hasn't said where he stands on some of them. What do you make of that? And are voters reacting to that in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I think for Mamdani, it's a clear situation where he doesn't necessarily want to rock the boat just before he potentially gets into office. I mean, the city council is heavily against these housing proposals, and they've made
Yeah.
that clear. And I think, these are people who are going to have to be his partners in city government and that he's going to have to work with. And I think he's probably thinking about, like, maybe I don't start off on a negative foot, so to speak.
Mm.
He's
Hmm.
willing to let that go for now.
We'll see. I mean, that might be smart politics for him. Getting into City Hall, we'll see if voters ding him at all for not really taking a stand. Nia, thanks so much for joining us and for bringing us your excellent reporting as always.
Thanks so much.
Okay, when we come back, according to one assembly member, it's the one issue that didn't get enough love this campaign. Which one is it? We'll find out when Battleground NYC returns. And we're back with Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote. And joining me now for the bigger picture is Assemblymember Robert C. Caroll, a Democrat representing District 44, which includes several parts of Brooklyn. And he recently co authored the piece, Why Isn't Education at the Center of the New York City Mayoral Race? Assemblyman Caroll, welcome.
Thank you so much, Essie.
You gave me permission to call you Bobby, so I'm going to.
Okay.
Just so viewers know, I was given that permission. I respect him, but I was told to call him Bobby. So for time, I'm gonna. Bobby, I just want to say first, you are correct. This issue did not get the attention it deserved. But I am proud to say that here on this show, we actually covered it a lot. But elsewhere, even in the debates, it really wasn't treated like a top issue anyway. Why do you think that is?
I think that there's a whole host of reasons. One, it's a tough issue. But really, there weren't enough New Yorkers. I know you were talking about it, but not enough people in the media talking about it. And of course, candidates respond to what they're hearing out on the streets. And so that's the reason why myself and former Chancellor David Banks drafted that op-ed. because we really need to answer these questions because, of course, the mayor does have control of our schools. He doesn't have control of foreign policy.
Oh, that's such a good point. And foreign policy and you know, Trump were the things that came up first in both of the debates. And these domestic issues where the mayor really will have a say, kind of got shoved to the back or the middle of these debates.
Yeah. And, to parents, I'm a parent. I'm a New Yorker. I went to PS 230. And when I was a kid, I really struggled to learn how to read because I struggled with dyslexia.
Mm-hmm.
When we've got 70% of our kids reading below grade level, 50% not reading at all, that's what parents care about. It's connected to that affordability issue. If you have a kid who's struggling in school, guess what? You're going to try to find a new school, and that new school might be in a different city, a different state.
Yeah, and I want to get into these specific issues surrounding education in a minute. But first, let's talk about that piece that you wrote in Vital City, which, like you said, you co-authored with former New York City Education Chancellor David Banks. How did this come about? Why did you think you needed to take this message to the media?
Well, David and I worked so well together over the last number of years. I respect him so much. And we were both shocked that after the first debate, we thought, okay, this is the time, a serious debate. They're going to spend 20, 30 minutes on education. And there was one question. And we thought, this can't happen. We need to hear from all of the candidates, and they have differing opinions on these major issues that affect almost 1 million school children.
So of the candidates, who's gotten the closest to really zeroing in on the education issues that New York families are confronting? Because as you say, they've all talked about them in some degree. Zohran Mamdani has talked about certain things very specifically, other things very vaguely. And I could say the same for the other candidates. So who do you think of the candidates has really made this issue important?
I'm proud that Zohran Mamdani, highlighted New York City reads and literacy. But, I wish there was just a lot more talked about generally from all of these candidates. I don't think it's been a focal point. And that's the point of my job, of your job, is to say, hey, let's raise this up in a way that we can find out what's happening and how the next chancellor, the next administration is going to affect the lives of all these school children. So, I wish I heard more from all of them.
Zohran Mamdani gets a lot of credit for really laser focusing on the issue of affordability, and he's responding to voters in that. Voters have decided that is their number one issue as well. How do you make the case to someone who said, well, listen, voters aren't telling us it's the number one or two or three issue. We're responding to voters. What do you say to that? And how do you tie education to affordability?
Well, even if voters aren't, education is important, and it's always important when you're electing a mayor. This is one of the core responsibilities of the mayor. And so we need them to talk about it. But more importantly, a lot of folks who don't have a lot of political power, low-income moms and dads who are sending their kids to schools, this is their number one issue. But they're not connected to the media. They're not connected to elected officials or donors. And so we need people in positions like mine to say, hey, their voice matters too, because I do think it's the number one issue for a whole lot of parents.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm a mom as well. Stay right there, Bobby, because I have some other questions for you on the specifics of these issues when we return. More Battleground NYC after the break. We're back with Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote. Again, for the bigger picture is Assemblymember Robert C. Caroll. He's a Democrat representing District 44, which includes several parts of Brooklyn. Okay, let's talk specifics, Bobby, because I want to get into the things you think the debates didn't, which are the specifics of these issues of education that matter. What do you want the candidates and, more importantly, the next mayor to focus on the most?
I think the biggest issue for education is literacy. We're in a literacy crisis right now. Over 70% of New York City public school students read below grade level, and almost 50% can't read at all. We made some meaningful steps with New York City Reads and the reforms that Mayor Adams brought about, but it is far from mission accomplished. We need the next mayor, we need the next chancellor to take those initial steps and take the ball a lot further by making sure that we have evidence-based curriculum, that we're providing high-quality professional development for teachers, that we're doing things like screening children for language-based learning disabilities like dyslexia. These things aren't happening on scale and in a systematic way, and we need that to happen. And the only way you can have progressive education is you give children foundational skills, and the most important foundational skill is literacy.
That is it's a shocking number. It would be a shocking number anywhere, but it's, especially shocking in a city as vibrant and intellectual and cultured as New York City. Why has that become the case that we're in such a literacy crisis in New York City?
Well, it didn't happen overnight. We made a lot of bad public policy decisions over the last 40 plus years, where we went away from a structured and sequential curriculum that's rooted in the 5 pillars of literacy and went to a place where we thought literacy and the attainment of literacy was kind of through context clues and guessing, and that you could kind of logic your way out of it. And it just didn't work. Yeah. And the problem is those policies have been embedded in our system. And David Banks, the former chancellor, deserves a lot of credit for turning that ship around and changing that. But that doesn't happen overnight. Old habits die hard. And so we need to make sure that the next administration is going to double down on one of the successes of the Adams administration. And we need to do that because you can't have an equitable city. You can't solve the affordability crisis if people can't actually read.
For sure. Mamdani kicked a bit of a hornet's nest when he mentioned undoing the gifted and talented program. We've had guests from all sides of that issue on Battleground to discuss it and parse it. How important is that program?
I don't think it's that important. I'll be honest. It's 2,500 kids in a system that's almost 1 million. And, I would never, as a policymaker, want to do away with a program that parents and teachers like. But when we know how many children are struggling and that they're struggling with the most fundamental skill, I am dogmatic about that. We need to solve that problem for all kids. That is the best thing. I think it's a little bit of a distraction. And so I'm not looking, if I was in that position, I wouldn't be looking to kick that nest. But I don't think it's really super consequential when you think about the whole school system.
Gotcha. Mamdani has also talked about taking control of education away from the mayor and putting more control in the hands of parents and teachers. Sounds good, maybe. Could also sound a little problematic. How does it sound to you?
So look, after my struggles, as I said before, with dyslexia, my mom went back to school and became a reading teacher in New York City public schools. There's phenomenal teachers. There are phenomenal principals and parents. What really matters is getting people in a room who care about and focus on the important issues of the day. There have been really good chancellors and there have been bad chancellors. David Banks was a great chancellor. But there have been other chancellors like Kathy Black who really was not up for the job. And so what I care about is a mayor and a school leadership team that focuses on the main priorities. And I think the main priority is solving our literacy crisis and giving children foundational skills. And so, again, I'm not particularly wedded to one system over another. I'm wedded to what does that team value when it comes to education? Do they value foundational skills? Do they value evidence-based literacy? Then I'm ready to work. If they don't, it doesn't really matter if it's mayoral control or if it's a more democratic board.
Got you. And what about school safety. That's a very important issue to a lot of New Yorkers. A lot of New Yorkers are looking at Mom Donnie's free bus program, for example, and thinking, what is that going to do to our buses? And will I feel safe putting my kids on those buses? What's your take on the issue of school safety?
Well, look, I think school safety and fast and free buses are slightly different. But of course, safety is paramount in making sure that folks, whether they're using mass transit, they're in schools, feel safe, and having the proper personnel there to keep them safe is super necessary. But I'm a supporter of fast and free buses. I think that that is a good idea, and I think we can do it in a way that not only makes buses better for commuters, but that are completely safe as well.
With just a week left in this election, what's the most important message you want voters to hear as they go to the polls and vote for their next mayor?
Well, look, I'll be clear. I'm a supporter of Zoran Mamdani. I've worked with him in the assembly for 4.5 years, and so his affordability agenda is important. But clearly, I want folks to think about education and ask candidates about education in this last week.
Okay, again, don't go anywhere. I've got more questions for you after the break. More Battleground NYC when we return. We're back with Battleground NYC. One last time for the bigger picture is Assemblyman Robert C. Caroll, a Democrat representing District 44, which includes several parts of Brooklyn. As a Democrat, Bobby, what lessons are you looking to take away from this mayoral race, which we know the whole country's watching?
Well, look, I think one thing that Zohran Mamdani has been great about is honing in on affordability and talking about how much people are hurting because they can't pay the rent, they can't pay the fare on the bus, they can't afford childcare. I have 2 young kids. I spent almost $50,000 last year on childcare. That's unsustainable. And what I'm hoping is that Zoran's going to say, and you know what? We need to add education to that menu. We need to make sure that we're solving this issue full circle.
So if you're a Democrat, say, running somewhere else, what lesson would you take from this race that might not include some of those progressive policy items that maybe aren't as appealing in, some purple districts, some red districts?
Sure. Look, mass transit might not be a big
Right.
thing in certain suburban or ex-urban districts, but I think all of us, right? We've either got rent or a mortgage to pay. We've got
Car
bills
payments.
to
Yeah,
pay.
for sure.
We've got utility
Yeah.
bills to pay. How do we get utilities down? We've got childcare costs. I do think that, look, most people, right, aren't obsessed about politics. They care about their family. They care about maybe their job, maybe watching a baseball or a football game, enjoying life. And how can we make their life more enjoyable? How can we make their life easier? And I think that that's important. I think that's why Zoran has been so successful, is I think he's honed in on the big issues that affect everyday New Yorkers. And so you've got to change that if you're living in a different city, a different state. And I think people could be really successful with that message.
Mamdani's also inspired a lot of new voters and young voters to get out and vote. And I'm just wondering if you think anyone in the current Democratic Party has that same kind of buzz, that same kind of appeal. He's the one filling 13,000 seat stadiums today.
Look, it's amazing what his campaign has done. He's been a really great leader and communicator, and a lot of people can learn from him. My guess is there are going to be some other people over the next year or two as we get closer to the 2028 presidential election, especially, that are going to rise to the
Such
occasion. I don't
as
know if it's I don't know. Is it Gavin Newsom? Is it Pete Buttigieg? Is it Wes Moore? Is it somebody else who I haven't named? Is it Gretchen Whitmer? Or somebody none of us know, right? Nobody knew. I knew who Zoran was because he served in the state assembly with me,
right.
but nobody knew who he was 12 months ago. And so I don't think we've found that person yet. And I think people can be surprising, right? They can reinvent themselves. That's the wonderful thing. And, it might not be a 34-year-old from Queens. It might be somebody else. But I'm confident that we're going to have lots of great leaders. I'm an old man compared to Zoran. I'm 39. But I think there's going to be a lot of people in their 30s and 40s and 50s who are ready to take up the mantle and fight for what we believe in and fight for really the American dream. And I'm excited to be a part of that in any way, shape, or form. And I'm excited to work with Zoran when I think he's going to win next Tuesday. And hopefully it'll bring bigger and better things for New York City in the years to come.
We're already seeing a lot of younger candidates, take up this challenge, I think inspired in part by Zoran Mamdani. You're seeing them all over the country challenge Democratic, either establishment candidates or older candidates, and, to varying degrees of success. But we're also seeing something of an intransigence among some of the older elected Democrats in leadership who just don't want to go anywhere. Maxine Waters or Eleanor Norton. This is not good for the country, especially when you have so many Democratic voters begging for fresh new faces.
Look, I think this is a moment of generational change, and that we need that. We need to make sure that younger voices are heard, and none of these positions are a birthright,
Right.
and none of these positions last forever. And I think it's very frustrating for folks, and it makes me worried about what their judgment is if the only thing they have looking forward to is the office that they hold and the power that they hold. I want leaders who also have different perspectives. I want leaders who are in different stations in their life because, of course, they're much more attuned, right? Childcare is an issue for younger people,
Right.
people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. It's not an issue for people in their 60s or 70s usually. So we need those voices at the table.
Yeah, voters agree. Do you think Democrats are in a strong position to take back seats in the midterms?
We should be. And I think our message is clear. Obviously, I'm very worried about the gerrymandering that's going on in places like Texas.
Sure. Let me just
that
stop
is on
you
a
right.
scale
Just
that
let me
we've
stop
never
you.
seen.
But what do you mean? You think the message is clear? I'm very unclear on what the Democratic message is going into the midterms, and I think voters are unclear on what the message is as well.
Well, and I'm not going to say I speak completely for the Democratic Party, but when it comes to protecting health care for working people and making sure the ACA is still there, protecting just general due process of the law. I mean, what we see going on, I was arrested in 26A Federal Plaza at Immigration Court. I mean, these are degradations, and I think the Democratic Party has been very clear about that. And I think they maybe need to be clearer, but I think there's a message out there that is winning, that the majority of Americans of all backgrounds support.
Assemblyman Robert Caroll, thanks so much for joining us on Battleground. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And thanks to you for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow and the rest of the week until this election thing is over. More Battleground NYC tomorrow.
Thanks for watching Battleground. We're now joining Live Now's nonstop stream of live and breaking news.
bustling stores, dazzling fresh fruit in abundance, hot food served at restaurants and in people's homes, and desserts like sweet treats, crepes, milkshakes, and even ice cream. I see this stuff on social media, by the way, on a daily basis, and I have yet to see it reflected in the news, in these outlets. Social media is a powerful storytelling tool, and we all understand how